everyone, this is Judy Warner. Welcome back to the OnTrack podcast. Today I have another phenomenal guest who is Eli Hughes, the Chief Technologist of Tzero. Eli has agreed to be a keynote speaker at AltiumLive Virtual Summit, and I can't wait to share him with you as he's going to talk to you about systems design and what it takes to be a full stack hardware engineer. So lean in, enjoy. I'll see you on the other side. Welcome to Altium's OnTrack podcast, where we talk to leaders about PCB design, tackling subjects ranging from schematic capture all the way to the manufacturing floor. I'm your host, Judy Warner. Please listen in every week and subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, and all your favorite podcast apps. And be sure to check out the show notes at altium.com/podcast, where you can find great resources and multiple ways to connect with us on social media. Well, hi, Eli. Thanks so much for joining us today. I look forward to our conversation.
Hey, Judy. How you doing?
I'm so excited. So grateful that Ben Jordan, introduced us, and I'm really excited to share you with our audience today. So before we get started, why don't you just tell our listeners a little bit about your pretty impressive background and then give us a little thumbnail about Tzero.
Well, thanks. Well, thanks for having me on. I've always wanted to participate in some Altium events and AltiumLive. So my name's Eli Hughes. I'm currently a CTO of Tzero, a startup founded in 2017. My background, I actually came from kind of a defense industry type background doing, R&D work. Quite a bit of my career was spent at the Penn State Applied Research Lab, where I did a lot of research involving acoustics, underwater sound, electronics, power electronics, robotics. And then a few years ago, myself and some other colleagues decided to put out a shingle, as it were, and start this company, Tzero, kind of focused on acoustics, sensors, and kind of cloud connectivity. And then here we are today.
So we're going to get into a little bit more about Tzero. I don't want to give it away and how your acoustics engineering background ties into Tzero. But why don't you just give us a little tease about what you've designed and sort of the problem that Tzero is solving in the world.
Sure. So we've designed the world's first acoustic fermentation monitor designed for the craft brew industry. So what we came up with was a sensor that uses sound waves that can actively interrogate the state of the fluid and actually measure how the yeast are performing when beer is brewing. And so what we did is we took that technology and packaged it in a way that it's more than a laboratory device. It's something that's easy for the brewers to install. It's easy to clean, and kind of using the power of cellular networks in the cloud. On day one, they can have their brewery digitized and seeing what's going on inside of those tanks.
Who knew acoustics had an application in beer brewing? I really love that. So thank you again for agreeing to speak at AltiumLive. We are so happy to have you. So your topic is called Crossing the Chasm, and you're going to be talking about the road to becoming a full stack hardware engineer. So tell us about why the title, why this topic, and we let you guys pretty much choose the topic. So what do you find so compelling about this topic?
That's a good question. So kind of when I started really early on, actually in middle school, with interest in software. And it kind of started from, I used to play the original Nintendo Entertainment System. I was an addict. But that kind of grew when we started using computers in our computer lab. And we learned programming, and those pieces got connected for me. That Nintendo and that computer were the same thing. And by the way, while I'm writing software, I need to know something about the hardware to really do cool things, to really make my games run faster. And so that's what started for me. But why I chose this topic was that there is an incredible dynamic range of information that you kind of need to know. And in 2020, it's a lot different than it was, say, in the 80s or 90s when I was kind of coming up and learning this stuff. And the challenge is, especially for, new students, it can be really overwhelming. Just the amount of information you have to know, the different pieces and all the different pieces you have to connect. And the idea behind this talk is that it's okay that you don't know everything, but there's a lot of neat stuff in all the connecting pieces. And I just wanted to tell a story, about my path. And we're going to use the Tzero Brew product that we connect biology to acoustics to sensors to circuit board design to cloud computing and web technologies. That you really can cross the chasm, and it is doable.
Which sounds like an overwhelming divide of disciplines and things you need to understand to create one product, which is true when you bring, I guess, any system to market. But when you're starting at biology, that sounds like a big task. You mentioned to me on previous conversations that you've observed sort of this, what you call the imposter syndrome, that there is so much information out there, and that when engineers come into a room, that maybe they all feel like everybody else knows everything and they don't. So tell us about that and why that's been interesting to you.
Yeah, because I've suffered from this, that somehow you think, and I remember this was even going through college and even my first semester. I remember I was a freshman in college, and because I went to a tech school, and in one of the labs there were students in their fourth year, and they had a book open, and they were doing something with the Laplace transform. It's something you learn in college, a mathematical operation, and to me this was magic. And then I started thinking, well, how come I just don't? They already know it. Why don't I know it? And then you start to kind of feel bad about what you don't know. And then I just noticed over the years that happens a lot. And especially in the engineering and hardware engineering community, I noticed, I'll give you an example. I peruse a lot of forums for hobbyists and whatnot. And there's people who want to get started and they say, hey, I want to try this out. And then everyone responds of like, well, why aren't you routing a DDR3 memory to this fancy processor? And they're jumping in way far down the road when all this poor person wanted to do was hook up A to B. And then everyone is stepping on each other's toes to prove how smart they are. And I think everyone has maybe this common thought that if I'm not using the fanciest routing tools or know all the latest in EMI techniques, and that there's something wrong with you. And that's so far from the truth.
I think that, when you explain it in that way, Eli, I just wonder if that's just a human dynamic, because it seems like it applies with other areas too, but I can see how it would particularly apply in engineering, especially because things are changing so fast. The whole world has changed between the time you graduate college and 4 years later, it's screaming fast. So another thing we talked about, so as part of your journey, how did you sort of gain self-awareness about that, and then sort of want to take this information and take your learning journey and then hopefully pass the baton?
I'll relate it to something. Probably one of the biggest things that I learned coming out of college, which had nothing to do with anything academic, was I was really interested when I graduated in digital signal processing, number crunching, primarily because I played guitar and there was all these fancy devices that you could plug your guitar into and make it sound like something else. And I really wanted to know how that worked. So I was convinced I'm going to be a DSP engineer. I'm going to go to work for Yamaha or Korg or Line 6, and that's my life. I hate everything else. Well, the first job I took actually was involved in power electronics, and it was power electronics that turned out for a lot of Navy applications. I said, you know what? I just need a job right now. I'm going to take it. This doesn't interest me. It doesn't apply. Well, here it turned out that it opened me up to like such a different world that I didn't even know existed. I didn't know about piezoelectric transducers, acoustics, the complicated nature of the amplifiers, the fact that they needed a DSP engineer to do all this programming, that it sent me down a path into a universe that I had not known that even existed. And still to this day, I think, boy, how short-sighted was I thinking this is what I wanted to do. And I was already judging something based upon an experience I never even had yet. And that's actually what started down the road where I decided to go to graduate school for acoustics, not electronics, to study the science of sound, because I could start blending and learning from physicists, mechanical engineers, bioacousticians, and take what I knew and put it all into a big melting pot, as it were. And that's what it taught me. I don't need to know everything. It's okay if I don't know everything. Guess what? Neither does anyone else. We're all trying to figure it out together. But there's a lot to be learned and experiencing and interacting with people that know other things than you.
So when you think about sort of hardware engineers and the challenges they're facing today and the people that you're going to be talking to at AltiumLive, when you think about, even when I started in this industry, it was just a lot more simple. There was your circuit designer, and he or she would stay in that lane, and then there was a PCB layout person, and so on and so forth. It's very linear. But as complexities increase, it seems like you need to know a little bit about everything. And like you said, and then sort of fueling this imposter syndrome, like it's so much. Sort of what advice or what topics do you think you're going to cover at AltiumLive that'll be kind of tangibly helpful? And what advice would you give to maybe younger engineers, but maybe older ones too? I don't know, it may apply. To how to sort of break the barriers of that sort of thinking and how to tap into resources and things that give you a broader perspective.
Sure. Boy, it's so there's like a chain. I can think of any product or any design from beginning to end. And in the case of like Tzero brew, it starts with biology in this beer. And for us, it ends up as a picture on a web application to give someone a piece of information. And in between that, there's a lot of pieces. And one piece of advice is, and it kind of goes against some of the systems engineering mantra of you have interfaces, worry about it to your interface, and then your job's done. Well, I kind of feel that if you're standing somewhere, let's say I'm holding up my circuit board here, and this is in one of our sensors, there is a section of this circuit that has to tie into our, the thing that does our actual acoustics. Then there's the other side that has to talk the other way. It has to go to the cloud. Well, there's decisions I can make to make the lives easier for the people on both the left and the right. And so, for example, one of the things we discovered when we first started building our sensor is we were really excited about this sensor. Well, it turns out no one wants a sensor. They need a solution, right? They need the thing that connects all that information. And at the time, I had done some things like cloud-based stuff. I learned all about web pages and some of the back end, but I always tended to trivialize it, saying, "Oh, those aren't real programmers. They're not using assembly language." And it was I was woken up pretty quick when we had to build this entire system and piece this together. That while it's true their environments are different than ours, they have as big, if not bigger, challenges than a hardware engineer. And if I spend my whole life saying, hey, that person over the fence, they do the easy stuff. Well, we're missing out on a lot of collaboration to make a much better product, as well as an opportunity to learn. And so that's probably one piece I would give is don't trivialize someone else's job because it looks easier than what you're doing, because looks can be extremely deceiving. And be willing and ready to accept new things, whether it's a new programming language, a new method, a new tool, just because it looks different. And I think if you can kind of keep that mindset, it gives you a little bit of force. It at least gives you a little bit of flexibility. And if you're willing to be malleable, then it's, I think you can go really far.
Well, what I would distill that down to maybe is like check your ego at the door and stay curious.
That's a good distillation.
Just pay attention to your upstream and downstream stakeholders and learn to walk in their shoes for a minute, learn what their concerns are. And I think it makes you just so much better of an engineer. The ones that I know that do that really well, I really have a great deal of respect for them. And most of them have sort of checked their egos at the door, which is not easy for a lot of us.
Well, it's interesting, and I'll give you a quick story to relate on a project that it was a large team, large system, used traditional systems engineering approaches. Everyone had kind of their wall. I got to get to this part of the wall. And there was always conflict. There was always, why are they doing this ridiculous, there was always conflict. But it turned out, one time I said, you know what? Instead of guessing about what they're thinking, let's go to the building across campus, say, hey, Bob, what's going on? I'm Eli. I'm working on this. I think I can make your life easier, and I'm here to serve you a little. I can serve you. How can I help? And just starting that dialogue it changed everything, because people weren't making assumptions anymore, and they were going beyond reading the ICD or the spec. They were getting some understanding of why people were thinking and feeling what they're feeling. And I think engineers have a lot to learn on that, in that realm of trying to really empathize and understand, why do people think the way they do and why do they feel the way they do. And I find it very liberating once you can kind of remove that barrier and really work with other people.
An observation, I couldn't agree with you more, Eli. And I also think Bob, who you just went and shook hands with, now you're a person. You're not the signatures on the ECO or whatever that's wrecking his life, right? You're actually a person that has context, and he's seen the whites of your eyes. And I think that makes such a huge difference. And what I find really interesting in the engineering environment today, I mean, in the world at large, but the way it plays out specifically in the engineering world, is we're more connected than we've ever been in the history of the universe. And yet we're more disconnected because of cloud and internet, and we can fling emails and IMs and texts and all of that. And sometimes I think that, I just know people are going to hate me for saying this, but that human interface, right? And learning from each other and playing a bit more like a team, I think is a more effective way to work. Just don't hate me for saying that, you guys, but sometimes I just feel like the tomatoes coming, I don't know. Maybe the people agree with me, but I don't know. I just think that whenever you can collaborate, as you said.
Well, it turned out in my case, where there was original conflict, it turned out to be a lifetime friendship.
See, I told you.
and it turned out that while we didn't always agree, and sometimes it was very colorful, there was a mutual respect. But in terms of getting some of these projects done, had we not gone in the same room and interacted, it'd be totally different. And I think that extends to so many things. And I'll bring it back to trivializing maybe what someone else does. I'll tell you all the time, people say those JavaScript programmers, they're not real programmers because they didn't program a PDP 11, in the 70s. Well, it turns out they're doing something else, and in some cases they're doing some really complicated and really neat things that if you put these people together, oh my God, the things that could possibly happen. And that was something very humbling for me once I decided to not trivialize things to that level.
Well, I think there's a lot of wisdom there. What are some of the topics you're going to cover? Sort of, what are some of those interface points? Do you have a sense yet? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I do. So I like to start from. It's really easy to get to not be able to see the forest through the trees. And start thinking like as simple as, what problem am I trying to solve, and what is the absolute simplest way to do it, and whether it's a measurement I'm trying to take, and do I fundamentally understand the problem I'm trying to solve. And I'll give you an example. I spoke at the Embedded Systems Conference for a few years on DSP, especially DSP on a specific processor. But the first slide was always the same after kind of who am I, is that I said, I can do this operation on the most fancy processor you can buy today, or I could do it on an Abacus. It's fundamental to understand what am I doing and why am I doing it, kind of at every step of the way. Because it's really easy even as an engineer to get caught up in forgetting about what you're really trying to accomplish, because you might see a new cool part. You might have a bug you're trying to track down, and it might be frustrating. That's where I kind of start. Now, I usually start, I think in terms of circuit board, like in terms of almost how an artist has their paint and their palette is, can I solve the problem with fiberglass and parts on it? And I actually root myself in that, thinking in those terms. And I find it's really, really helpful. Just as software engineers have tools or things they use to figure out, well, what can I be rooted in to help, interface these things together better. But yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm going to go.
Well, I'm really excited to hear it. You reminded me of a talk, I think it was 2 years ago at AltiumLive. One of our keynote speakers, Jeremy Blum, talked about empathic or empathetic engineering, which was the weirdest topic title ever, right? But it's exactly like spot on to what you're saying. It's about, what problem are you trying to solve? And what's that going to feel like, smell like? All your stakeholders, and just thinking sort of a lot more holistically, I think, and really what a huge trickle down effect that has on your work and your fellow stakeholders and whatnot. Well, the day that you're speaking, Eli, at AltiumLive is on a day where we're going to talk about sort of bridging the gap between, engineering and the other stakeholders in the process. So I think you're in the perfect position there. The other thing, for our listeners, AltiumLive registration, AltiumLive this year, since it's virtual, is absolutely free. We encourage you to go over and sign up. The website is live now. I'll throw the link in the show notes. And come, please, and hear Eli give his talk. And he and I were just talking before we started the podcast, and we have this idea up our sleeve where it's just a thought. I'm not going to make any promises right now, but we're really excited about it. So since Eli and Tzero is solving problems for craft breweries, there's a craft brewery that I just told Eli about that I came across in my travels in St. Paul, Minneapolis. 2 EMS engineers hung up their hats, I think, and went off and started a craft brew company called Tin Whiskers. and they have like Fourier IPA, and they have like circuits on their labels and stuff. It's truly our industry's, absolute brand. So Eli's going to chase those guys down, and we're going to try to possibly host a happy hour where you guys can attend, hang out with Eli, geek out over engineering, and maybe drink Tin Whiskers beer and learn about the device that Eli and Tzero have designed, and you can learn more about that. So that's what we're working on. Again, no promises, but we think we can do it. So Eli, we cannot wait to be with you at AltiumLive. We thank you again so much for agreeing to do a talk, and please share with me the link to Tzero and anything else you want to point us to.
All right, will do. No, it sounds like a lot of fun. I wish it could be in person this year. The world's in a little bit of disarray right now, but I have no qualms about ever traveling to San Diego when it does open back up, because it's every time I've been there, it was not nice in Pennsylvania. There was snow on the ground, and it was beautiful in San Diego. So,
well, I know for sure that Ben Jordan has a tour of craft breweries, but you have Guitars in Common and craft brews. So like I'll carry your wallets or whatever. I want to go on that tour. That sounds like a lot of fun. So again, to our listeners, thanks so much for joining this conversation with myself and Eli Hughes of Tzero. Please go over and register to AltiumLive. We hope to see you there. And until next week, we'll see you back at the OnTrack podcast. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and always remember to stay on track.